You're tuned in to Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions. I'm your host, Jason P. Woodbury. My guest this week is Beverly Glenn-Copeland. The release of a new career-spanning collection, Transmissions, the music of Beverly Glenn-Copeland, continues a wave of new appreciation for this pioneering folk, electronic, and experimental composer's celestial and enveloping songs. Offering a holistic look at the Glenn-Copeland songbook, which ranges from early folk jazz stunners to electronic devotionals and breakbeat inclusive pop. The compilation also features a brand new song, River Dreams, one of the many he says he downloaded via the Universal Broadcasting System, a sort of sonic radio signal generated by the universe itself. Beverly Glenn-Copeland joined me to discuss picking up signals from the cosmos, aliens, Star Trek, and a new documentary about his life, Keyboard Fantasies. If you enjoy this talk, please consider sharing it. Your friends can listen via any app that they use to access podcasts, or they can head over to aquariumdrunkard.com, where they'll find plenty more interesting talks in the podcast archives. All right, without further delay, here's my conversation with Beverly Glenn-Copeland. Thanks for listening to Transmissions. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Aquarium Drunkers Transmissions podcast. We've got Beverly Glenn-Copeland, and it's a real pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here. It is. Yeah.
How are you doing today? Where am I reaching you at?
Well, you're reaching me on the western coast of New Brunswick, looking across the Atlantic to PEI.
That sounds lovely. And you're in, well, earlier this year, the pandemic upended pretty much everybody's life, but yours quite especially. You're in a new place now, right? What was it that happened earlier this year where you had planned on being on tour pretty much, a large chunk of this year, but instead those were canceled?
My wife and I had sold our home before COVID started, and it wasn't due to be occupied by the new owner until mid-spring, because nobody wants to move in the middle of winter. And what happened was, it was an official thing that had to be honored, which of course we wanted to honor. So we were in the process of looking for a new home and had almost bought it. But it turned out that the home we were trying to buy was in Quebec. And the combination of everything going wonkers with, suddenly all the tours and things that were scheduled for me were canceled for a year and a half, essentially. The combination of that and the fact that the home was in Quebec, which was locked down and we could not get to it, meant that we did not buy that house, and then had no way to try to find another one, because you can't buy a house when people don't want you in their house and you don't want to be in their house.
Yeah. It's a bad combination.
A bad combination, right? So, and then the houses that we were offered by friends and whatever were not appropriate because they were either in another province, which was also locked down, or they were so tiny we couldn't have moved, both of us, or lived in it. So that was the problem for my wife and I.
Here in the States, obviously there was a lockdown, but it was maybe not quite as enforced, So I think that people still kind of continued about their day to day. Yeah, at least some people, although of course a lot of us have stayed
Yeah.
inside and all that. But in the midst of all that, I just can't imagine what that must have felt like. Not sure where you're going to stay, and then on top of that, you got to worry about this terrible virus that's going around. So I have to imagine that like it must have been a kind of a rough moment for a minute there.
Well, it wasn't a moment. It was a rough 6 months, incredibly rough. Um, um, but my wife is an incredible communicator, and she's actually a writer, among many other things. Her name is Elizabeth Glenn-Copeland, and she was keeping a visual, not a visual, a written, um, sort of almost like diary of what was happening day by day. She wrote, she actually wrote 3,000 emails in a short period of time. And the result was that we got so much attention from media, that a couple came forward who were themselves billionaires, quite literally, who were looking to pay it forward. A gentleman and his wife, both of whom were lawyers, and had made a lot of money many years ago. And they had a stunning home, which they gave to us until we could find our next home. And certainly they gave it to us for nothing for like 9 months, essentially.
Wow, that's incredible. That's
But
incredible. That's good. That's good fortune.
it just goes to show that people can be very, very compassionate. And it's not about how much money they have or don't have. It's just about their heart space.
There is a documentary about you going around, and in it, one of the things that you say that really kind of got my mind going was that you talk about how there are a lot of songwriters who are poets who write music, and then they figure out how to. Or I'm sorry, the other way around. There are a lot of people who write lyrics as poetry, and then they kind of figure out how to make that work with the music.
Yeah.
Whereas you have operated primarily in another mode where it's about the music and the melodies. And then I think the way you put it was you said you sort of have to figure out what the music is trying to get you to say lyrically. And I found that fascinating. And I wondered if you could tell me about one of the first times or the first time that you felt like you got what the music was asking you to say correct.
Jason, I wish I could answer that question. I have no idea.
Yeah, yeah.
That it's just been that way since I first started to quote write music, unquote, or to receive music, which is really what it felt like. But I really don't know. I'm sure there are many pieces that I wrote. I think that I wrote myself that which ended up not having any staying power for me beyond a year or something. But the pieces that have lasted and still feel relevant in one way or another, I really don't know. And some of those happened back in 1969, 1970, but I couldn't tell you which one in particular.
But you always had for you it's always been primarily about melody and sort of the sonic quality of things, at least to start.
Well, that's what I receive, because
Hmm.
I did not train as a wordsmith.
Yeah.
I trained as a musician, so that's how it comes to me with music. Yeah.
Your new collection, Transmissions, the music of Beverly Glenn-Copeland, features a new song called River Dreams. It's gorgeous.
Thank you. I'm glad you like it.
And a lot of people that I speak to about music, a lot of folks will say, I don't feel like I write my songs so much. I feel like I receive them, or I sort of intercept some sort of broadcast from the
Yes.
universe.
Yes. Yes.
I'll hear a lot of people say things like that, and then I'll push them on it a little bit and be like, well, where's it coming from? What does it feel like? And it's usually kind of moves into more nebulous territory that maybe doesn't feel quite as concrete, but you actually have sort of named this process. I think you call it the universal broadcasting system.
Yes.
I wondered if you could tell me what it's like, or how you conceive of that, or how you envision what the UBS is.
Well, I envision it as the universal mind, which I believe it has. People call that by many different names. But for me, it's the universal consciousness, that because everything is conscious, really. So the universe as an entity, which it seems to be, has a consciousness, and I believe that this consciousness is constantly speaking with us. It has been speaking with us and speaks with all sentient entities. And sentient turns out to be trees, trees,
Sure.
and all the animals. They're all rocks, probably too. They're all sentient in some aspect, for sure. Especially now we know that trees busy talking to each other, so that's sentient. So I believe that that the energy of the conversation between the universal mind and its creations are constantly going on. And it's just that people back in the ice age, they were receiving this. Most of our indigenous, all of our indigenous people were receiving messages all the time and speaking. When you understand the things that they were saying, it's actually incredibly profound. I think we just lost track of it, most especially in the Western world, over the last. Well, no, not most especially in the Western world. I shouldn't say that particularly, but it has really been dimmed down since since the Industrial Revolution really got going. Yeah, we started, being more concerned with what we were creating, specifically mechanically and in other ways.
Yeah.
And so it got dimmed down. And what's happening is that, when you really look at the incredible philosophers that have been speaking down through times, and that includes women, but women for the last 10,000 years have not been considered on an equality with men in many cultures. So what they had to say was lost. And but the ones that we can hear, they've basically been saying the same thing in all our cultures. The same messages have been coming through.
Which is to say something about universal oneness, or the connectivity of things. Is
Yes,
that?
yes, yes. Basically saying we are all one. We are all one. We are all one with the universe itself. And as far as those of us on this planet is concerned, we're just one little group of people. All we're one family. Just one family.
You on your website, you write, there are three challenges in my life. The first is being Black in a white culture. The second is being transgendered in a heteronormative culture. And the third is being an artist in a business culture. And all of those are very substantial things. I wonder, in terms of that feeling of universal oneness, as someone whose work, took quite a while to really reach people the way it now has. Did you ever struggle with that idea of universal oneness in terms of looking at, let's say something like a business culture that wants your music to be something that could be easily sold or easily packaged, or even, dumbed down maybe, to better suit the marketplace. When it comes to universal oneness, do you look at that sort of power structure and say, like, this power structure is the result of people not understanding that sort of message that maybe the universal broadcasting system is trying to get out to people?
I don't think of it so much in terms of the music industry. The music industry it's industry, period, as we have conceived it in the last while. It has been based on profit, and profit for a very few.
Yeah.
And that's the point.
And
Um,
yeah.
so when you say profit for a very few, that's basically saying it's okay for me to eat well, but whether you eat or not is not my concern.
Sure. Yeah. And it's also sort of a culture of extraction, and sort of like
Yes.
almost gobbling up resources,
Oh, definitely gobbling up resources and gobbling them up, for a profit that once again were the profits for the gobbling. They tell us, quote unquote, I'm not quote unquote, but we're led to believe that we all benefit from this gobbling. But that's not true. For instance,
No.
I'll say fracking, for instance. Okay, so they want to frack something, which is to say to get out the gases and or stuff that they can use to heat homes or whatever it is they claim. Well, it's turned out that the fracking pollutes just about everything it comes in contact with. But meanwhile, the official language is, oh, but this is creating jobs. Well, yes, for 15 minutes, relatively speaking, it creates jobs, and then it leaves those who thought they were getting a job, because this is what they're told. They find out, oh, they get to drive a truck for a couple of months, and then the company's gone, and then fire is coming out of their taps.
Right. Yeah. It's short-term thinking
Yeah.
at the very least, and obviously deranged thinking when you kind of apply it to a societal level.
Yes, it is. It's not that we can't come. We can cure ourselves of this, but we can't unless we understand how we are being manipulated by it.
Over the course of your life, do you feel like there have been ways or practices that you've been able to more closely tune in to what the universe is trying to tell you?
Well, I think for me personally, that has been augmented tremendously by my practice of Buddhism.
When did you first become interested in Buddhism? You were raised Quaker, is that right?
Yes, I was raised as a Quaker. Yes. Well, actually, the Religious Society of Friends is the official name, um, which is an amazing philosophy. But at a certain point, I was looking for something in my adulthood, which I started looking when I was around 24. I started looking very seriously, and I just kept searching because I felt that it should be a fit for me personally. And when I was 29, I found the exact sect. It's a lay organization of an ancient Buddhist uh, one of the sects that started out in Japan in the 12th, 13th century Japan. I found this organization, and it was all over the world. I really appreciated the fact that it was, at that time it was in about 123 countries. Now it's in about 195. And people in Russia are chanting this. People all throughout South America, Central America, all throughout Africa. You know, it's
Yeah.
China big time. It's everywhere. And I felt, okay, and I understood what it was trying to say. And the fact that it was a chanting practice was good for me because when I had tried totally quiet practices, silent practices, I found that I'm too twitchy for silence. And yes, I understand the benefit of de-twitching, but chanting de-twitches you as well.
Yeah.
So I went with what was natural for me. Yeah.
Yeah, because like friends meetings, that would be they're based mostly on silence, right? Is
Yes, that's right.
that's
And
that's where
yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jason. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So it's folks sitting together in a room, maybe a circle. I think usually a circle, if I understand it right. I've only been to one. And then you basically just sit there and listen for what I guess.
For the universal broadcasting system.
Exactly. But for you, it felt like the process worked best when you could receive it and then sort of rebroadcast it essentially vocally, right?
um, it, it,
Is that
it was,
close to what it feels like? Yeah.
yeah, not, it isn't really that so much, if unless you're referring to the rebroadcasting it as the chanting, but it's what it is that Quakerism taught. Quakerism teaches that at the basis of our life, when we sit in silence, we get in contact with the inner light, and the inner light it almost translates directly to what Buddhism talks about.
Yeah.
Buddhism says that our most fundamental nature is that of a Buddha, which is to say, to be the inner light, you could call that God, and that of a Buddha, you could call that the consciousness of whatever you want to call it, consciousness of the universe. It's teaching the same thing. It's teaching that compassion, active compassion for self and others, and not just thinking about it, active compassion for self and others. Um, um, Infinite courage and infinite wisdom are who we actually are, and that it just gets, it gets all plastered over with the trauma of this lifetime, so that we don't recognize it. And so basically, you're just trying to undo the trauma of the lifetime by chanting with the understanding that you are you and every other person around you, all the trees and whatever. The fundamental nature of all of life is this incredible, shining, compassionate way of existing.
Yeah.
So, that's, and it just so happens because I was born yakking, practically born talking, flapping my lips is the and vocalizing is the most natural way for me. And I found something for what, that worked in that way.
So, I mean, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but I mean, when I listen to your music, I get a sense of what you're talking about. I get a sense of that feeling of oneness, and I don't think I'm alone. So many people have discovered your music and turned to it, and it doesn't seem entirely coincidental to me that in this time of intense stress, this time of intense, I mean, everybody I know is freaking out all the time. Me most certainly included, But when I'm listening to your records, there's this sense of peace and this sense of calm and this sense of gentleness that doesn't feel, I want to try to word this as carefully as I can. It doesn't feel like an escape from the world. It feels like a connection to something, maybe like a deeper understanding of the world. And it feels to me when I listen to something like Ever New, which has, however many plays on Spotify, a gajillion or whatever, and so many people must be tuned into this message, and I think a lot of people are picking up on it. It's interesting to me that you seemingly always had a sense that what you were making was for future generations. And I wondered if you could tell me a little bit. We're talking about stuff you made in the late 60s and then the 70s and 1980s and up until the present. But you always seem to have a sense that your audience was, either to come or children at the time. And I wondered if you could talk to me a little bit about how it was that you had that sense.
Well, I certainly didn't have that sense when I first started receiving songs.
Mm,
Back in '69 and '70. I didn't really understand it in that way. Um, I think that understanding has come over a period of time. Um, Somewhere, probably I don't know, maybe in the '90s, it occurred to me what was, that this music was had 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 a had a reference point that was yet to be understood.
Sure.
But that would, hopefully would be understood. Well, and a lot of people seem to understand it, but, not in any kind of mass way. I, you know, because, I mean, I'm in the process of just developing as a human being, just like everybody else. So a lot of things that, that come to me and come to many others are beyond our necessarily, they're not necessarily, we don't necessarily understand it in its larger implications. And yet at the same time, we're able to convey something about that because where it's coming from doesn't have a time.
Right.
It doesn't have a time. And, for us, it seems like it's, oh, wow, this, this message, I received this message, 40 years ago, and it's not time yet. But really, from the universe's point of view, this is the time. The time is so, for us, it's very extended. But from the universal point of view, it's contracted to something that can barely be measured.
Right.
So,
Right.
Or even if there is such a thing as measurement, it probably exists in time past, time future, time now, because probably there really isn't time. Time is a function of, we're starting to understand it's a function of this, that, and the other. So, I mean, it's we're slowly understanding how profound the way the universe works is. It's just utterly profound. So, I mean, I'm this little blip, and I started tuning in without even really knowing about it at some point or another. The universe is sending this stuff because it already knows what I'm going to be. It already knows that I'm going to be a musician, blah, blah, whatever. More than what I know at that point, or my subconscious, 90% of my brain that most of us don't use knows already. So, it's hooked in. And then, of course, a generation started to be born in the late 80s and late 90s that had been predicted for a long time that this generation would represent a huge step in our growth as human beings, and that it would represent a step out of teenagehood into adulthood.
Yeah.
That is how your generation has been acting. Not all, of course not all, but when you look at what's going on around the world, and because you've been able to connect with the world through the internet, so you are world citizens because you know what's going on all over the place, and you're listening to all kinds of music, and you're having discussions with people who are friends who live in other countries that in the past you would never even known they existed, much less be able to talk to them, not to mention go to visit them. Right.
Right.
So there you are. And then because you're having these conversations, which I had finally come to consciousness that I was having, with the universe, and it was coming through this music that was being sent to me, suddenly, your generation found it. And so then the rest, is what's happening now.
Okay, let's take a break to hear from our sponsor. Patreon. You know it, we know it. Patreon is helping us make Aquarium Drunkard month after month. Creators, you know that social media and streaming platforms help people find your work, but they don't necessarily help you actually make money from it. With Patreon, you can stop rolling the dice of ad revenue and per-stream payouts and grow your career through the direct support of the people who care the most, your fans. Patreon is built for creators, not advertisers, and it helps you skip the middleman and develop a sustainable income source by offering a monthly membership to your fans. In return, they'll get access to exclusive community, premium content, and the chance to become active participants in the work they love. If you're a podcaster, video maker, musician, writer, illustrator, a creative person of any kind, sign up on Patreon now. That's patreon.com and change the way your creativity is valued by building the steady income stream you deserve. Let's get back to the show.
I want to ask, as I understand it, you've been interested in science fiction for a long time as well, right?
Oh yes.
What were you, yeah, what were your early, because obviously, the sort of religious or faith traditions, meditative practices, all of those things are a big part of how you understand the universe. I wonder if science fiction was also helpful when it comes to thinking about things like space and time and infinity and all of that stuff. What were some of your early interests in
Yeah,
science fiction?
yeah, a better way to call it would have been speculative fiction.
Certainly, yeah. A lot of people
I think that's how
preferred that.
yeah, and I only just recently found out that that's how it's now being called, what it's now being called, and I agree with that because I was interested in. I only read stories that were written by astrophysicists and physicists uh, who had received the highest awards possible in their own science, but happened to also be brilliant writers. So they like write these stories and they weave a story around basically the speculative science that they were thinking about, and that just knocked me out because they were looking at what is the universe, how are we put together, how is the universe put together, what is time, all of these questions. And of course these things are still going on, and they're changing as they continue to be able to see more with better telescopes and more profound mathematics and whatever understandings of quarks and this and that and the other thing. Well, you put that together, and for me, that was like, oh, the universe sending messages of how I am composed, right? This,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
this is my body, and this is how it works, right? And I know that I just loved that, and I still love it.
Were you the kind of person who went to things like, SF conventions and stuff like that? Or was this mostly something you did kind of on your own?
No, I didn't go to science fiction conventions because most of them tended to be around a particular show or something
Right.
that they were interested in. And yes, I did watch 3 episodes a day of Star Trek when it first started happening, but. But
I did make a note, like, ask about Star Trek, because I love Star Trek. Was
oh,
that something you watched, like, as a child, the original series?
yes, oh, definitely. I think my dad and I watched it together. Um, I was in my teens when it came out, and it was knockout. It was just knockout because right there and then, right in the very first concept of it, they were talking about life and our connection to life, our own connection in a compassionate way to life that was different from our particular life right here on Earth. Right off the bat,
Yeah.
they're talking in that, and that's like, yeah, okay, this. First of all, you're speculating that there is life. Oh, there is for sure. We're not alone out here. Give it a break. But whether or not anybody wants to get in contact with us at this point, and we're a dangerous species still.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to wonder if there is anybody out there. I would maybe avoid this dot on the map for now.
That's my perspective, is that if they've lived through their own nuclear phase, right, which is the phase that where you blow yourself up, and we are still wondering whether we still don't know whether we're going to live through that phase, and
Right.
if their life was in any format that is anything like ours, which makes sense, there'd be other formats and that are like ours. There'd be formats that are not like ours as well, of course. But if it was anything like ours, then and you survived your nuclear time, the time when you could figure that out, then you certainly don't want to get in touch with another species that is still working on that.
Yeah.
Now the current thing is the scare thing. Oh my, they're making all these science fiction movies that are really about our own phobias about ourselves, which is that
Sure.
everything wants to destroy us. Like that's our fear gone crazy. And then we put that on other concepts and other potential other races in the universe, other people and or beings or whatever. So
Yeah.
I don't have time for that.
Sure. Well, anybody who knows me knows I could make this entire interview just about Star Trek, but we won't.
Good.
But I do want to know if you kept up with the franchise as it kind of went on into like the Next Generation and Deep Space Nine or anything like that, or is it for you the original series is where it's at and you don't necessarily need
No. That one that got interrupted by COVID, the one that came out that had the black woman who
Discovery,
amazing, absolutely amazing the stuff that they're contemplating there. I mean, it's still they have to make a good story, so of course there's still lots of bad guys and everything and all the rest of that. But it's brilliant in the way it's starting to conceive of how the universe might be put together.
Well, yeah, I mean, right down to things like the mycelium networks and mushroom consciousness and all that stuff.
Exactly.
Quite as much. It's fascinating stuff. It's fascinating thing. That's new. That's beautiful territory for a speculative fiction show to explore because it is doing, like you had said, right off the bat, the franchise was about the future and the possibility that the future might be better than the present. It's very hard to imagine that sometimes, but
yes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I want to ask about your first couple records. You on those beautiful early records, you're kind of employing a folk blues tradition, and I'd love to ask sort of how you got interested in folk music.
Well, I got interested in folk music when I was in my early teens, because I was listening to Odetta, and then later on I started listening to Joan Baez and other of the great folk artists. That was called folk music. I don't know if it really was, music from the folks.
Sure.
Right. I was listening to pretty much everything. I was listening to folk music, to jazz, to R&B, you name it. I was listening to it, and as a young person before going to university, and then after I got to university, I listened to quite a bit more of it. So yeah,
those records have like a very there is a jazzy feel as well, and a kind of looseness. I think of people like Terry Callier or Joni Mitchell, people who were sort of mixing that rhythmic and sometimes even cosmic, kind of feel in terms of that spaciousness. Those records were really great, and I wonder now, when you listen to them, as somebody who's gone on to make a lot of electronic music, when you listen back to those early records, do you hear something in your delivery or in the way they work that makes you think, okay, early on I was tapped into this quality and that's something that's continued on? Or when you listen back, do you find yourself thinking like, I would change this, I would change that? Or how do you feel when you listen to those early records? As often as you do, at least. I don't imagine you sit around.
Are you talking about my own early records or theirs?
Oh, yours.
I don't listen to my music.
Yeah.
I'm just too busy thinking about, what's happening right this second. And then once that second's gone, I from a musical point of view, I exist pretty much in the present only.
Yeah.
That's just I'm idiosyncratic that way. Although it hasn't been until recently that I was forced to listen to anything that wasn't something I was writing or felt I was trying to hear from the UBS. There wasn't anything I was listening to, but I was forced to listen to these old things of mine, and it was at that time that I went, actually, it wasn't anything musically that I would have changed when I heard it, but there were several things when I thought, my goodness, slit your throat, that's depressing.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so it's like I was taking note of the fact that I'd had a journey, and that I was journeying in and places that were more painful
Right,
than
right.
when I was younger. Aside from the fact that I'd come out of the classical music tradition, where pain, you know, if you wanted to talk about, you know, the pain, instead of talking about it in 5 minutes, you know, you went on for a whole opera, right?
Yeah, yeah. There is a sense of immense scope to your work in terms of, I mean, just even song lengths, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's because you know, I never understood that nothing could be put on the radio unless it was 4 minutes or less. I didn't get that. That was just me being, and I wasn't writing for that anyway. But it took me a long time to understand that concept.
Sure, sure,
Yeah.
sure. Unless you've got a very strange radio station, which is,
Right. Well,
yeah,
we have them now, right?
yeah, thankfully.
Thankfully, yes. People are writing music that's meant to, you know, to really explore things deeply, and it's nothing for them to go on for 12 minutes.
You you mentioned opera, and there is an operatic element to what you do. That was something that you studied in your youth. What were your music studies like growing up?
Well, first of all, I couldn't stand opera, but I had to study it
Yeah,
because it was part of my vocal training. I preferred the song repertoire of the 18th and 19th centuries, primarily the 19th century song repertoire that was coming out of Germany and coming out of France. Um, those were my that's my favorite music, vocal music in the world. Um, but I had to study opera, and opera I didn't understand opera because everything was, you know, I don't know, it didn't appeal to me. I couldn't find my way in it. And in those days, I now actually enjoy it.
yeah,
But that's because it's changed. In the old days, you know, if you were an opera singer, it was all about your voice. It had nothing to do about your acting ability. Not to mention the fact that everything that was created for voice in those days was, you know, the heroine always had to die at the end. Give me a break.
of
And
course.
right, you know, or
Just like those, just like those beautiful old murder ballads, you know,
yeah,
where it's like always some poor woman getting killed and tortured.
right, right. Anyway, so you know, so I didn't care for it. It seemed like such a false thing, and though the music was often very beautiful, I couldn't get into it. But that's
Sure.
because I was, you know, I was a really hard marker. You know, but that's more about me than anything else. But now, you know, the opera, first of all, it's translated. People can see it. They now know what's being said. And now the sets are astounding. The acting is unbelievable.
Right.
And then you've got the beauty of the music. So it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I get it now. Yeah.
Yeah. Now it gets to be, I mean, even, you know, like you mentioned with Star Trek Discovery, it needs to be a good show on top of everything else. And
Oh,
it
it's
sounds
gotta be.
like
Yeah,
you've got
exactly.
that now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they got that down pat. And you know, I've appreciated the things that I've seen. I've actually gone to a couple of operas and gone, oh wow, this is great.
Sure, sure. Was gospel part of your upbringing too, in terms of, you know, sort of tonality and the things you employ in your music?
No, not at all. My parents were Quakers, and Quakers did not come out of the Black tradition.
Right.
Came out of the English tradition of the 17th century, and was, you know, was didn't have anything to do with music at all. And my parents never went to Black churches at all, so I didn't really hear it. And my father's mother was a beautiful singer, and she actually sang very classically, believe it or not.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I wasn't introduced to it until later in my life. And once I was introduced to it, it was like, wow, that's happening. Check that out.
Right.
That's amazing. But, but it wasn't, it didn't get to take a deep hold of me because I didn't get introduced to it till later in my life.
People like Odetta, obviously, that's part of the makeup there.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
In the 19.
But you have to understand something, Jason. What knocked me out about Odetta was two things. One, she wore her hair natural; she didn't straighten it. And two, her guitar playing was off the scales. She was like a drummer with a guitar.
Yeah.
And that really, that was just, that knocked me out. I loved that. And that's what I was studying. I didn't even really notice how she was singing as much as the way in which she was translating it in terms of the rhythms she was using.
Yeah, that almost percussive element.
I mean, not almost, totally percussive element.
Right.
As in an African way. Because
yeah,
you don't hear the guitar. The guitar, where it came from is probably the Middle East somewhere or whatever originally, and then turned into what it became. But it's not used as a percussive instrument, right? Not in our culture, and until recently. And she was one of the first people to use it as a percussive instrument. And I just, oh my goodness, because I play hand drums. And it was like lessons in drumming.
Yeah, that's incredible. When you in the early 80s, you found yourself composing, with a computer and moving into electronic music.
Yes.
And I wondered, how did that sort of shift into utilizing these new tools that were available to you? Did it change the way you thought about your own songwriting?
No, what it did was it allowed me to have a palette where, and I'm quoting myself, where if you squint your ears, you could almost think you were listening to a violin. Because you see, I heard all of those things, but I didn't have the money to be able to ask people to play behind me. Once I started writing stuff, like the early pieces were pieces where I just went into the studio, like the GRT album.
Yeah.
I went to the studio and I played live what all those pieces were on the guitar to these incredible jazz musicians whom I didn't even know how amazing they were. And I played them one time through. They said, "Oh, would you just be so kind to just play that for us?" And I played it and they went, "Oh, isn't that lovely?" And then everything was taken live off the floor, first take. Right. That's how that whole album was recorded. So it's not like I thought to myself, now I'd like to hear this line and I'd like to hear, a cello doing this and a trumpet doing that. I just went in and sang the piece and these guys just went to town.
Right.
But later on, as I was starting to write, I was starting to go, I'm hearing an orchestra here. I'm hearing this, I'm hearing that. I'm hearing kettle drums. I'm hearing this and that and whatever it was I was hearing. I couldn't afford to hire musicians to translate that for me. What the computer did was it gave me a palette of sounds that were everything from drums to sounds that maybe only the universe could make.
Right.
Yeah. That you might hear if you're listening to a star. Oh, that's what the star sounds like, or whatever, right? Yeah. So that's really what it was about for me. It's not that it changed how I wrote; it's that it expanded what I was hearing.
Yeah. Those records are really incredible, and you've continued making electronic music. I think the Primal Prayer album was from 2004. Is that when that was originally released?
Yes, that's right.
And that was released under the name Phoenix. Is that right?
That's right. Mm-hmm. Well, okay. Once again, it's not that I was trying to make electronic music. I mean, some people sit down with the intention of making electronic music. basically I am just using what I am accessing what computers can create in terms of sound in order to to fill out what I'm already hearing. I
Yeah.
I don't consider myself to be an electronic composer at all. And when I hear people who are, it's amazing, and it's an entirely different cup of tea.
Sure, sure. You're a composer who has utilized the palette of electronic music to achieve the broader palette that you're hearing in
Yes,
your mind.
That's right, Jason. Yeah.
That record incorporates a lot of, break beats. It's like it's rhythmic in a way that is that's very, very interesting. If it's not dance music per se, but obviously people have sort of embraced your music for that dancey rhythmic quality. What's your own relationship to sort of that style? I mean, have you ever been a person who goes to dance clubs?
Yeah, actually, I used to go to dance clubs in the 90s. For about 4 years, I went to dance clubs, but I would always leave when everybody else arrived. I would go when they first started spinning whatever they were spinning, because dance for me is a form of prayer. So I would go to dance so I could dance over the whole floor.
Yeah.
And then when people started to come, I would leave. I still dance, and it is still a form of prayer for me. But prayer meaning like where you really, really go for whatever it is your body wants to say in that moment, whether it's like down boogie woogie, or or quiet raising your arms in prayer, or whatever. So um I the breakbeat things, I didn't even know what that was. And in fact, when I put that album together, I wasn't even aware that those were things that was in another piece of equipment that I got, which is an electronic drum. It was in the drum, and I didn't even realize that somebody had put those in the drum, that
Right.
and that they had used it in their own music, and then it had been bought out by the piece of equipment that I used. And then I was told later, wow, you used the breakbeat from da 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 da. I said, I did. Because I lived in audio silence for 40 years. I never listened to any music.
Yeah.
So I was out of it. I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea what I was doing in terms of using those breakbeats. I'm thrilled about it because those breakbeats were just amazing. And what I would do is I'd find something that was already in the drum, and I'd say, wow. And then I would proceed to drum over top of it.
Yeah.
Because
So you're
yeah, so that's how those things were created. Not in
you
every single one, but several of them, yeah.
you talk about mostly not listening to music,
Hmm.
sort of living in silence.
Hmm.
I I wonder, uh, do you ever hear echoes of that universal broadcasting system in other people's music?
Oh, absolutely. You have to understand it. It's a when I say that I don't listen to music, I mean I went through about 40 years where I did not listen to music except if something came across my ears. Then every once in a while, something would come across my ears, and I would put it on continuous play.
Yeah.
So I might, over the course of 40 years, have had periods of time where maybe 10 records were on continuous play.
What were some of those records?
Oh, yeah, What's Going On, Marvin Gaye. Um, I went through a time where I was listening to, for 1 year, I was listening to Carole King's first album.
Oh yeah.
Um, um, I listened to the German composer who writes for films currently, who's so hot. He wrote the score for that Superman thing that wasn't called that, but was basically, what's his name?
Is that
Oh,
Hans Zimmer?
yeah, I put Hans Zimmer. I had a car that had amazing speakers at one point. I put Hans Zimmer on and listened to it every single day for a year and a half, and I would cry as I would drive.
Wow.
You know, I mean, I listened to various pieces of the Barra McNeils, who are incredible Celtic musicians, and I listened to several of their pieces and cry while I drove. I mean, I have what I listen to is huge. It's very Catholic with a small c, which means wide, wide. I
Yeah.
listen to all kinds of music, but I don't listen to music like some people listen to music where every day they're listening pretty much all day. Most musicians who aren't fall into the category of listening to a lot of music. Some musicians fall into the category of listening to almost no music. I fall into that category. It's a much smaller category, but I've been told that by and large, musicians fall into one of those two. 80%, 85% fall into listening to everything they can get their hands on and constantly. And I fall into to living in primarily in silence.
I got it. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such an interesting thing because your music does have a feeling of spaciousness, right? That doesn't feel like it's sometimes music can feel claustrophobic or like it's even in danger of too many things sort of influencing it. Your music has this kind of spaciousness and this sort of direct quality that I think it has all music has an interesting relationship with silence. You know,
Right.
rhythm
Yeah.
is predicated on silence, but it feels to me like as much as the silence of maybe say a Quaker meeting might have felt a little restrictive for you, it does feel to me like there is a pretty comfortable relationship you have with silence at this point.
Oh, I loved Quaker meetings. You have to understand, I couldn't wait to go to Quaker meetings. I loved the silence. It's not that
Mm.
I didn't love the silence. It's just that when I got older and I was searching for, and I wasn't going to go to a Quaker meeting, and when I went to other, because I was looking, I, I think maybe, I've been a Buddhist in many other lifetimes. I've probably been everything in every other lifetime, but I think the one that was influencing me the most, if in terms of recent lifetimes, was Buddhism. And
Yeah.
so I was searching for something from the East. And so most of the things that I found that were from the East were pretty silent. And I had just come to the conclusion that, at this point in my life, at that point in my life, I wasn't looking for silence. I had really enjoyed that as a child, and I felt like I'd already done my silent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love the silence. Yeah. I'm sorry that I just wanted to say it's not that I didn't love silence. Go on with what you were saying. If you can remember, Jason, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you don't ever have to worry about interrupting me. I think I think that there's something about your music that does, like I was saying, it incorporates that feeling of silence and into sort of like some of the live stuff on this new collection.
Right.
It when you're in the midst of these performances, it feels to me like you're in such a specific place and in such a specific moment. I don't know. It just, like I've talked with people who will tell me that like sometimes on stage they're singing a song and it's just completely overtaken them and they're just utterly existing within that song. And
Yes,
then
I understand that. Yes.
I've talked with people who tell me that sometimes in the midst of a song they're thinking about what they're going to have for dinner afterwards. You know what I mean? Like they can't help it. They've done it so many times. But I wonder for you what it's like when you're on stage with your band. Your group is called Indigo Rising.
Yeah.
Lately, with this group, what does it feel like when you're on stage at this point?
Oh, it's very electric because I never know what any of them are going to play. We have general ideas, but they don't play specific things. They play to the feeling okay, now this one of them is going to do this, and is going to have this part here that they can interpret. So in some ways they're not a jazz group, but in some ways they are, because whatever they're going to play, they're going to play it, and so it's never the same in any two nights. But so everybody is very present, and I'm extremely present because I'm listening to them, and they are encouraging and knocking me out most of the time. And then I tend to, when I'm singing, I can't think about anything else. I'm not thinking. If I am thinking, I'm not thinking about anything other than how to create the sound, or how to really truly be in the emotion of what this is talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel like you're tapped into the broadcasting system at that specific moment, or is it maybe its own zone? It's something else.
Yeah, I've had a couple of occasions where I felt like I was, that I was going beyond my capacities.
Sure. Yeah,
for sure. But by and large, I'm too much into the moment to think about what it is that might be happening beyond that. But if in that moment, I've had times when, basically my eyes cross up. I was going, when I go, oh, this is even beyond my capacity to sing. What is happening here? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it feels like sometimes. Mhm.
I have to imagine that you miss performing live, given that this year has mostly taken that out of the equation. Have there been ways where you can have safe, socially distanced, band practice or anything like that?
I'm not able to play with my band at all. No, with my young cohorts, I guess we call it. No, we're not able to do that because first of all, they're scattered all over the place. So we're not in the same area necessarily. So that, no, that hasn't been possible at this time. I'm sure it will be at some time in the future, but I have actually been doing concerts to band tracks that were created for me to be able to do that at other times, even before I started playing with them.
Yeah.
So and the tracks are sufficiently beautiful from my perspective that I'm able to, though I know it's always going to sound the same as opposed to when I'm playing live. It lays down enough of a bed for me to be able to really, really get into whatever it is I'm singing. So
Yeah.
that's ongoing all the time. In fact, I have something coming up at the end of this week that's that very thing, 40-minute concert. So yeah, I'm getting to be with my audience even though I can't see them.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to a great place to close. I want to ask you about that feeling of an audience that you can't necessarily see. It was a couple of years ago, right? That this Japanese record collector named I think it's Ryota Masuko, if I'm pronouncing it right.
Yes, that's right.
Reached out to you and sort of started this dialogue about bringing your record Keyboard Fantasies to Japan. I'm curious, did you have, I'm sure that over the years you had heard that people, loved your records, that your records had become cult favorites, what did getting that email feel like? And did it, in retrospect, signal the start of kind of a new era for your artistic practice?
Oh, well, no, it didn't. It didn't signal a start of a new era for my artistic practice because that was just going to go on anyway. It's just to be a matter of whether or not anybody ever heard any of it,
Right.
which is a different. um, But yeah, he wrote an email asking me for if I had any copies left of the original cassettes, and I had lots of copies left because I'd only sold a very few of them. And my wife, was able to know exactly where they were. Thank goodness, or I'd still be looking. I have no memories. I'd be still looking 2 years later or something. She was able to say, yeah, and put her hands directly on them, and we sent them off, and he sold them in a matter of days, really, and that was shocking.
Yeah.
And that was the starting energy for what is now, for us talking today, Jason. Yeah.
I'm sure that you've heard from so many people who tell you how useful they find your music in terms of, you know, art doesn't have to have any, utility. That's one of the great things about art, but it can be really something special when art helps somebody feel less bad or alone in the world. Um, have you had a lot of people speak to you about your work playing that role in their lives?
People have let me know that they find the music comforting. And that for me is all that I would ask of it. If someone can feel comforted by this music, then it's doing what it's supposed to do. That what it was sent to me to do, and I'm thrilled about it. I want to. I'm going to add something here, which you would not, have asked me about, but I'd like to publicly thank my wife, Elizabeth, um, who has been more than a partner, um, more than a partner.
Yeah.
She was the person who made it possible for me to literally eat for many years when various problems with my knees and this and that, and being able to stand up, I could no longer do the kind of jobs, other kinds of jobs that I might have been able to do when there was nothing going on with music. She started a children's, and she's a brilliant artist in many disciplines. But she started a company that we ran together. That was a children's theater company that and involved, ultimately ended up involving adults as well. For many years, we ran that together, and she was, because she studied theater and had done theater professionally and all kinds of stuff. She was the push behind that, and literally my relationship with her ended up making it possible for us to have a roof over our head and have food and all of those things, without which, and not to mention the fact that she was also um, a co-collaborator of many things that we created together, that folks in the rest of the world haven't heard quite yet, but we hope they will.
Sure.
Yeah, we hope they will. Anyway, I just would like to acknowledge her in my life, and the gratitude that I have for the part that she's played in making it possible for me to be speaking to you today, Jason, and to be able to put this music out and not have, who knows what disappeared,
Yeah.
standing on a street corner somewhere with a cup out. Who knows?
Having a collaborator like that is so crucial, and it must be a wonderful thing, especially
Yeah,
given that the world it's very easy to feel alone right now, but having a true collaborator like that.
Yeah, a life collaborator is what it has turned out to be, and
Yeah.
Anyway, so I just wanted to thank her personally, and to let all of you know that those that love you, love them back.
Oh, that's such a beautiful note to close on. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak about your remarkable work, and Star Trek and the outer space and time and everything that we've covered. Very small topics, certainly easily digestible and understandable by everybody who's heard it, I'm sure.
Well, thank you, Jason. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm only sorry that that I couldn't be seeing you at the same time. But I won't say that. I'll just say I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Well, thank you so much, and hopefully in the near future we will be able to see each other at some point.
Yes,
So
I hope so.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful Sunday.
All right, and blessings to everyone out there. Stay safe, please. Stay safe, and thank you for all that you're doing for all the rest of us. Okay, bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions. I'm Jason P. Woodbury. I write and produce this show. Andrew Horton edits our audio. Video production by Jonathan Mark Walls. And our executive producer, guru, and main man is Justin Gage. Before we get out of here, I want to plug this upcoming Sunday, October 18th. We're going to be back on the air of Dub Lab with another 4-hour presentation of radio-free Aquarium Drunkard, featuring my show, Range and Basin, Tyler Wilcox's Doom and Gloom from the Tomb, Marty Sartini-Garner's Personal Sky, and this week, a special presentation of Chad De Pasquale. You might remember him from a few weeks back. He interviewed Jerry David DeSica. He's going to be bringing us a brand new episode of his RFAD favorite, New Happy Gathering. Listen by pointing your browser over at dublab.com. You can tune in via your smart speaker as well through the TuneIn app. I think they've got a live Mixcloud going as well, so there's no shortage of ways to listen. The broadcast will be available to listen to whenever you want after that via the Dublab archives, and individual shows will be presented on demand for Aquarium Drunkard's Patreon supporters. So if that sounds good to you, consider making a monthly pledge over at patreon.com. Just look us up, Aquarium Drunkard. All right, we'll be back next week with another strange talk for these strange times. Until then, live long and prosper.
Child whose hand I hold.